Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining Philip, Tutty and I, Claire Lavin, as we present this webinar today, Employee Training in Times of Challenge and Change. Okay, so just to introduce Philip and I, Phil is the head of Litmos training content. He spent a lot of his life working in online education. He brings a wealth of experience in digital education and is really passionate about the transformative power of learning and what it can bring to organisations, their people, and their overall success. He's also my boss. I am Claire Lavin. I have to say you're a good boss now, Phil. He is, though. I'm a product manager with a background in education and multimedia and communications. I'm also really passionate about learning, and I'm passionate about representing the voice of the customer in the business as well, and building products that meet customers' needs. So without further ado, let's just talk about the outline today. It's split into 4 parts: adjusting to the new normal, supporting staff and business continuity, building learner engagement and collaboration, and finally, we'll talk about how to prepare your employees to return to work and what that means for your online training. Another thing I should have mentioned at the start is that we will have some poll questions throughout at each of these part dividers, just so, because we'd love to hear your thoughts on how you're finding the adjustment with this new climate with COVID. So I believe we have a poll question here. Do you like working remotely? A, most of the time, B, some of the time, and C, not at all. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes to see what results we get there. Last time we did a webinar similar to this one, we asked the same poll question, and most people, 52%, enjoyed working from home, and just under 50% said they only like doing it some of the time.
How are you going, Claire? Are you
I'm
finding
going well. I've adjusted. I think I found it quite tough because I'm an extrovert, but I have adjusted. I think when we go back and in whatever form that takes, I think I would still like to come in for some of that time because I am missing the socialization aspect of work. Yeah. Okay, so I've got some results here. 48% of attendees have said they enjoy working from home most of the time, and 48% have said some of the time, and 4% have said not at all, which is pretty interesting. I think only 1% said that last time. So we will have some questions at the end of this webinar today, a chance to talk a little bit more. So we may hear some other questions relating to that at the end of the presentation. So thank you for that, everyone. Okay, moving along. Okay, so the new normal. I mean, we've been living it for what, 8 or 9 weeks now. We've seen a lot of social change. We've got social distancing, rapid economic change, massive business change. There are travel restrictions, business closures. We've seen some massive and rapid unemployment as well. And there's just in general some changing ways of work. As well as this, we've got policy changes and organisations are having to update their policies on the fly. Okay, so over to you, Phil.
Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, what's introduced into the workplace as a result of all of those changes is a completely new workplace reality. And, you know, again, this has only been sort of with us for 9 weeks, but if you imagine 9 weeks ago or 10 weeks ago that we'd be having whole workforces working remotely or having such uncertainty in the working environment, I think it's quite unheralded for the workplace reality that we're in. So nowadays we're working in you know, sort of quite a different reality. I think we've got concepts of work-life balance that are quite different to what they've ever been before. I heard someone coin the term work-life integration, and I'm working at home, and probably a lot of other people are working at home. I think businesses have really been focused on that continuity and survival. So it's the complete uncertainty that comes with to organisations. And I think that, there's been a major focus on, looking after people, I think, as well at this particular time. But we've never seen it before. Some of the numbers that are coming out in different organisations, probably 50% of organisations have got some or most people working from home. And I think what we're also seeing is just the future of organisations being rapidly different to what they are now. So we might move on. And I think, from the perspective of the audience that we have, people in HR, people in training, people in learning and development, people in organisational development, this has been probably one of the most challenging times ever. And we think about the role that HR has played in all of this time. In a lot of cases, it's been managing downsizing or suspensions or having people laid off. Trying to manage the health and safety of frontline workers. And I think health and safety has taken on a whole different perspective for organisations now. We're dealing with a virus that has such huge implications for individuals and homes and communities, that all of a sudden we're looking at health and safety and the way in which people are interacting with other people around them. So, one of my own sons works at the local supermarket, and it's one of the things, in conversations we have all the time about what he's doing to protect himself from contracting the virus, and what he's doing from a work health and safety perspective during the course of the day. So organisations have had to really introduce quite major and stringent work health and safety practices. And obviously everyone's been working on supporting remote working arrangements, or putting in split shifts, or changing people's timetables, or doing sort of rotations at work that are there just to prevent what's going on with people. So I look at this now and just think it's the time when HR's had a major challenge it's needed to face, but also been the time more than ever that HR has had sort of a seat at the table to be able to make a massive contribution to organisations and other people. I mean, HR has also had to deal with a lot of stakeholders as well, whether it's facilities managers, IT, EAP providers. It's become quite critical. The role that HR plays now is more critical than it's ever been.
And I think Phil, the other important truth here as well is that HR are doing this in addition to their usual duties of their role. So we've still got people returning to work from parental leave. We still have workforces who need compliance training, So all of this is in addition to the usual businesses, the business as usual stuff. So
yeah, absolutely. So I suppose, for HR, the real focus has been around, safety, health, well-being of people, and business continuity and survival. And it's just interesting that sort of final little dot on this slide. Couldn't have imagined we'd be talking about this 2 weeks ago, but ultimately, HR's got the here and now priorities. But it's also got to start thinking about the future. What's the return to work going to look like when it's safe? And already we're seeing a lot of restrictions being freed up, and there are conversations that are going on in the workplace. The politicians are talking about it. The medical experts are talking about it. We're now having conversations around what the return to work looks like. So for HR, it's looking after the here and now, but I think it's also gazing a little bit further down the track about what the future is going to look like.
Thank you, Phil. Moving on to part 2 now, supporting staff and business continuity. Before we get into this, we've just got another attendee poll. What do you see as the main challenge of remote working? A, feelings of social isolation. B, team collaboration and communication. C, time management. Or D, other. Last time we ran this poll, I think feelings of social isolation and team collaboration and communication were the options that we had the biggest response to. And quite a few people also had issues with time management. So will just be interesting to see what results we get when we run it this time.
I was interesting, Claire. I was talking to my brother yesterday, and I said, how are you finding working from home? He works in government, and he just doesn't like it. And I said, what's the problem? And he said, he hasn't got a sort of a hugely active social life over weekends, and he relies on the interaction that he has with his co-workers at work as a major part of what his social life is. And he was really suffering from that perspective of that social isolation. And it's just, for him, he goes to work because he just likes to interact with people, and that's the biggest thing that he's finding now.
I empathise with that. I mean, as you know, I came back from parental leave on the 10th of March, and within a few days, I basically had to go back to working from home again. Had to go back to working from home, and the work, having two young kids, the workplace for me too was a social outlet. So I understand where he's coming from, and I think that would be a common experience for a lot of people. We do have some results here from that poll, almost exactly the same as the results we had when we last asked this question. So 38% of people said the biggest challenge of remote working are feelings of social isolation. 39% said the biggest challenge is team collaboration and communication. 15% said time management, so that's there too. And we have other at the end. I'd love to know what some of those specific challenges are too under other. So thank you everybody for that. Moving along.
Just
okay.
Yeah, it's one of I think the other thing too that we picked up, Claire, as one of the challenges that people are facing, and maybe this is in the sort of the other category, but there was a lot of angst from some people who are having the challenge of both working from home, but also having kids being educated from home. And one of the things that became a really hot topic amongst the staff as we've been talking to them is that real thing about how they're managing both to work productively at home and also support kids in education. But as you say, the results are very similar to what we found last time. It was also interesting. I was reading a blog last night from the US Society of HR Management, and it's interesting, these numbers, because reported in a survey that 71% of workers are struggling to work remotely. 65% of organisations are saying that maintaining employee morale is a huge challenge, and 30% of organisations said that they're facing challenges maintaining company culture while all of this is going on. So just another perspective, I suppose, from a US study that I was reading. So we want to move on.
Sure.
So, and I think there's a lot of business challenges that organisations are now facing, and we need to be looking at this from the perspective of, what this means for businesses. Data security has been a huge one. So as people shift away from the relative security of an office network and they're working from home, the whole issue of data security has been critical. Business continuity is obviously one. It's just making sure that organisations have got the capacity to keep trading, continuing, service their customers, and even managing financially in a long-term way. Leadership support's has been huge. I think there's never been a greater expectation that we're placed on managers or leaders to build team morale and maintain productivity. Managers now are needing to demonstrate empathy, to stay connected. You can't sort of be the dial in once a fortnight type boss anymore. People are being asked as leaders to understand their teams a lot more, ask more questions about people, their feelings, their families, how things are going at home. I think the whole issue of empathy is really, really critical now. They're also being asked to keep staff motivated and connected, and needing to make, I suppose, employees feel safe. It's just this other idea of feeling safe in the workplace has become really, really critical. And through all of this, you know, organisations' capacity to manage change and change in a form that has sort of come out of nowhere in some ways too. And it's also change that's affecting all levels of the organisation. It's not like we're doing a restructure top down. It's change that's really been unplanned, externally imposed, where everybody's impacted on it. So the business is different. And again, this is the environment that we in HR are having to operate in.
Thank you, Phil. So let's just talk quickly about how online training can help. Well, it's very simple. You can deploy essential training content, but you can also build engagement and collaboration amongst your workforce as well. Let's talk about now some of those areas you might like to focus on. So in terms of skill and knowledge gaps, we have well-being, soft skills, leadership, digital fluency, HR and work health and safety compliance, and IT security. Phil, did you want to talk about this at all?
Yeah, look, I think when we've started to poll staff, and so we did a survey, a relatively large survey, and just said what were the skill and knowledge issues that people were concerned about as we were going to the point where we were working remotely. Digital fluency was a really big one as a skill gap. I think everyone was really concerned as we started to use more and more tools and more web-based tools to communicate. That was a really big point. I think as well from a HR and work health and safety compliance perspective, we've all of a sudden lost the visibility of people's working environments and what they're looking like at home. So that area about making sure that people were, you know, up to date and skilled around ergonomics and some of the basic work health and safety issues at home were really, really critical. And obviously IT security picks up that point that I made in the earlier slide, that people having to really think long and hard about the implications of their actions at home from an organisational IT security point of view. So these are some of the things that people were giving us feedback on, and certainly from the perspective, and I can talk from the perspective of SAP, these were some of the areas that we had a really big focus on just from the perspective of strategies that we were putting in place. And so we can sort of go to the next slide because we can then start thinking about, you know, the type of training that we were doing. So this was the stuff that we pushed out as priority training for our teams. So that first one on time management, productivity and motivation was one that we saw immediately as a great training opportunity. So we started to curate some content around that. The idea of transitioning to a home office, mastering virtual communication and web conferencing were big ones. I think we also identified training needs and curated some content around leading virtual teams. So this was one that we thought was really essential as a training type area for managers. Mental wellbeing and mindfulness. It's interesting at the moment, we're still running in our company mindfulness training sessions. We're still doing yoga sessions. We're doing a lot of stuff that's helping people cope with individually with a lot of change. And then obviously we did things around IT security, health and safety and workplace bullying. So these are just examples of the types of training areas that we've been focusing on for the last couple of months within our group and also SAP more generally.
Thanks, Phil. It's interesting because I did hear that our LMS has had a massive increase in usage just since the coronavirus outbreak. Yeah. So it shows you that, you know, people are using this time to skill up.
Absolutely. And look, you know, I look at this now and just say now more than ever is the most critical time for training. If we look within organisations, I mean, the thing that training does is it starts to provide certainty and purpose, you know, and it helps with productivity, it helps with retention. It's about demonstrating commitment to staff and aiding security and safety. So, you know, it's more than ever, training's a really, really critical time. And I think for people in the area of training and HR, you know, the challenge now is to deal with the here and now and to start planning for the future. And it's to start thinking strategically about how we're running our training areas, but tactically about what we need to do in the short term. So, you know, my thing, I suppose, and my advice for everyone is to really look at the training plan. It's something which has got to be adapted and changed right now, and make sure that it takes into account the short and the long term. This is what I talk about, you know, being sort of strategic and tactical at the moment, but it's about having the long-term view around mental health, culture, collaboration, productivity, and basic compliance, and also trying to tie in with policies and policy updates as well. So right now, for the training area, it's really around, you know, responding to all of the challenges that we've been talking about, all of those things that we're facing on a day-by-day basis. But it's also starting to think more about the big picture as well. That sort of strategic view of what we're looking to do.
Thanks, Phil. So into part 3 of the webinar now, building learner engagement. And again, we have a little attendee poll. So this focuses on the benefits of remote working. What do you see as the benefit of remote working? A, better work-life balance. B, less time spent commuting. C, greater productivity. Or D, other. Last time we ran this poll question, most attendees said having a better work-life balance was the #1 benefit. Interestingly, only 13% said greater productivity. I think that reflects some of those stats you gave earlier, Phil, around time management and remote working.
Yeah.
But we'll just see. Oh, here we go. We have some results. So 40% of attendees in this poll, this webinar, have said the main benefit is a better work-life balance. 38% have said less time spent commuting, and 22% have said greater productivity. So that's really good to hear. And actually, that's an increase on the last poll we did. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Moving along now.
So one of the things I want to touch on, I was just talking before about this idea of sort of the strategic and the tactical response that we need to have at a time like this. And this, you know, the strategic response is really around making sure that we're improving employee engagement through training. And that's now more than ever. This is really a critical thing for all of the training that we do. It's got to be focusing on employee engagement, and engagement's just critical during times of massive change like this. And you know, when I look at this as sort of a general area, I look at it from the perspective of how we design more engaging learning, how we have a culture that's supporting training, and how we harness technology as well too. So engaging e-learning, now this is really putting an effort into the way that learners interact with courses, the learner experience, the way that the learning design and the digital design play out for the learner. And this is really traditional areas that we need to make sure if we want to have an engaging e-learning solution, it's really got to play out and be easy to use for learners. Culture is critical because it's about the way that organisations set and reinforce expectations to learn and consume learning, and support the delivery of learning to the workforce and to workers individually. About creating positive experiences for learners to learn and prioritising learning across the business. And sort of around setting up learners to succeed. I mean, this is where it's not, you can have the best designed learning solution, but if it's not enabled and supported throughout the organisation, it's never going to succeed. And the final part of it I often look at is the way we harness technology. It's using the platform to maximise engagement, and you know, understanding the capacity and the difference that your learning management system is going to be able to make. So if we just look at, I'll go on to the next slide, Claire.
Sure.
So when we talk about creating engaging e-learning, it's learning which is really built around the learner. It's learning which is classic moment, the dog just had to leave the room. It's learning built around what learners are looking for, what's in it for them. And so, you know, from the design of learning, it's around starting from the perspective of the learner. I think the more we look at learning, shorter is sweeter, and the more that we can create micro bites, small amounts of learning that can be digested in the shortest period of time is really critical these days. And we know as organisations are changing the demographics, we're getting more younger learners in. People want to consume things not in 5 minutes, but in 60 seconds. And some of the things that we're building out at the moment around micro learning, which is 60-second courses. Gamification is really, really critical in terms of just creating a more engaging e-learning experience for people. And it's from an interactivity point of view, but also from a rewards point of view. And so the more we can incorporate gamification into our learning design, the more people are going to start to engage with it. Making it relevant is really, really critical too. I think the idea of having content that's relevant to the task at hand, relevant to the work that people are doing. And sometimes, you know, we can use stories to make it relevant. Sometimes we make it relevant just by making it more role-based, but I think it's got to be designed in a way that people can see it. We use quite often stories in our courses, and I think storytelling is a really, really powerful way of getting people empathetic to what they're learning and engaging with it. And also video is another, you know, way that we're finding at the moment, a really, really simple way that we've got to be able to get people seeing. And I think this really also aligns with people's patterns of learning more and more, particularly from a demographic perspective. People are hoping to see more video and learning from video. And the final part really is around just really good instructional design, and that's around sort of the mastery of the way that we create content with learning outcomes built in there and very clear design around that.
Thank you, Phil.
So I think
it's really helpful.
So this is really, you know, more than ever, as I said before, creating that sort of engaging e-learning is absolutely essential to what we want to be able to do. And then obviously, you know, we need to be looking at the way in which we're harnessing technology and look beyond just the straight learning platforms, because the technologies that we have at hand to be able to create more engaging learning experiences can be the virtual meeting tools, the intranets, the collaboration tools like Slack. You know, it might be things that are in the HRIS platform that you might be working on. It might be tools that can improve recognition. It might be things that aid with communication. So I think looking beyond just sort of the LMS is something important. And then obviously, you know, it's also about leveraging your learning management system. And I think we have sort of basic hygiene expectations around what a learning management system is going to be able to do. It's got to be easy to use, particularly with remote workers. At the moment, people who aren't comfortable learning online, having to navigate a difficult learning management system becomes a real barrier for them to learn. It needs to be mobile first, and this again, this is a basic hygiene thing, but we've got to be reminded of it that the whole platform strategy has to be a mobile first one. It's got to be able to be accessed on any device. We have expectations that learning management systems have really simple to create, launch and manage learning programs. So from an administrator, the way that they can curate content, put it together into a learning path, push it out and manage the delivery of that is really, really critical. And, you know, this sort of goes to the heart of what we want to be able to do, which is minimising administrative loads of people who, as you said earlier, Claire, we have people in HR and training now that have got their sort of BAU job, but also having to deal with all the other challenges as well. So you know, a basic expectation of a learning management system is that it would minimise the administrative load that people have. And I think we also start looking for things like, you know, the capacity to draw learners to a platform through games and badges and use pre-packaged content. So this is what I sort of talk about, sort of basic expectations, the sort of hygiene things that we do. But we need to go beyond that and look at how we do leverage the learning management system that we have to create instructor-led training sessions, virtual classroom sessions and session modules. To see how the LMS integrates. I mean, we can do a lot of great stuff at the moment now where we can create a Zoom meeting and integrate that meeting as a learning object into our learning management system, be able to schedule that through as an ILT. So all of a sudden we're able to create content and distribute content a lot more quickly just by using some of the basic integrations that we have. Using things like learning pathways and journeys to be able to get more broad-based content into a general skill development area and push that out as a structured journey. And obviously the other thing we want to be able to do is to use social learning functionality like badges and recommendations, user-generated content. You know, the idea of being able to use the recommendation on an engine to start to create collaboration amongst people as they learn together, and creates that sense of engagement between learners that are learning remotely and also working remotely back in there. And I think that one of the other things that we need to be looking at with the learning management system is the extent to which you can use it to reward and recognise completions. So start to draw down data on completions and enrolments and use that as a way of sharing who's doing what in your organisation. And again, trying to create that engagement with people who are all working remotely.
That's a really good point about engagement. And I think one of the benefits of social learning is, as you said, having everyone work together also fosters that culture of learning, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, the other thing too, I suppose, you know, this is probably more of a tactical point than a strategic point, but leveraging existing training content, knowledge and resources, because we don't need to keep responding to training gaps and ideas that we have for training solutions by going out and commissioning a 3-month project to create an e-learning course. So look at the fast, smart ways of doing it. Start to be more agile and adaptive and take new ways of designing content. Where you can find off-the-shelf courses or resources, just use them. You don't always have to create things from scratch. Look at your internal resource base that you've got now too. If you've got policies or procedures that can be repurposed, or you might have presentations that have been used in the past, there might be you know, other material that you've got that you can really quickly and tactically get up and repurposed into an internal into your platform. I think the other thing is, now is the time to be finding and empowering local subject matter experts. One of the things that we've done quite well is found some people who are willing to put their hands up and say, I'm the expert on how to use Zoom, or I'm the expert in how to set up an office setup, and empower those local subject matter experts. Give them the tools to create content. Give them the authority to start to create content, and then they become a lot more nimble and adaptive and get material up there. So, you know, we don't always need to be using external SMEs to get things off the ground. If you want to be going back to this sort of agile, tactical approach to things, there's plenty of people who are in the business who have got expertise that they want to share. I think the other thing too to look at this is to say, what are the external resources that you've got? I mean, obviously we need to be conscious about what we're curating and making sure that we're getting content that's that is being validated, but there is plenty of material out there, whether it's YouTube videos or other links and resources that people have got that you can link in to create content in a much smarter and agile way. There's a lot of instructor-led training resources that are floating around in organisations, and a lot of materials that people have that they can convert. And I think you and I talked about this once before too, Claire. You know, the idea of going out and just finding presentations that the CEO or the executive of the organisation's presented and use that as another training solution. But all of this stuff here are things that you can be, this, you know, comes back to the tactical response that we have to these types of changes. This is stuff that you can do in a very agile, nimble way to get material and get it converted and put up there without having to go through sort of extended time going out and trying to build a course from scratch.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, so part 4, returning to work. Let's just do a bit of a poll question before we move on. So, bit of a change in tack for this one. If your workforce has been working remotely, when do you think they will return to on-site work? A, within the next month, B, not for a few months, and C, not sure. Let's see what I've got. Responses coming in thick and fast.
It's hard to say at the moment for us, isn't it, Claire?
I was just thinking that it is hard to say. I know certainly that the focus has been on adhering to the guidelines that are being issued by by the various health departments, and working from home if you can. But I know there's the company has to respond quickly and in an agile way as we move into the next phase.
Yeah. There's some interesting results.
So we have, okay, so 43% of attendees have said that their workforce would return to work within the next month. 29% have said not for a few more months, and 28% have said not sure at this point. So I think, probably the devil's in the detail here. I mean, those attendees who have said that their workforce will return within the next month to on-site work. I'm wondering if that is sort of, every day, or, assuming those employees that work full time, if it's 5 days a week, or perhaps they do some days at home. There are a whole lot of questions to be answered with return to work plans, I think, Phil. So thank you for that, everyone. Moving along now. Okay.
So, yeah, so it's sort of interesting. I mean, what we've been covering off so far has been looking at the changes that have really been imposed on the workplace, looking at the ways in which HR's had to respond to it, and then talking through some of the tactical and strategic responses that training has to be able to deal with some of the changes that we've got. And we've talked a bit about the idea of having that sort of strategic view and sticking with the strategy, but being a bit tactical in terms of what we might be able to do to be more responsive. And, we're now facing the next stage of all of this, which is turning our minds to what does return to work look like? This is stuff that's happening so quickly at the moment. So we've sort of been talking a little bit about how we're responding to the sort of the change that's been imposed on us, and now we've got to start thinking a little bit more about what the return to work might look like. And 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I probably wouldn't have predicted that we'd be having this conversation, but it is something which is really, really important for us to get our minds around. And really, it's around the first phase I sort of talk about, that explore phase. Right now is the time to start thinking about what are the types of things that people are going to need support with. We probably need to start looking at how we might go about asking people, what's going to go on, what's the future going to look like. I think we need to then start to look at how we go about adjusting to what that future looks like. And then I think beyond that, it needs to start to normalise and think about, how we then start to embrace some of the changes into this new normality that's going on. So I think, this is probably, as a framework, we need to start looking at what are we going to do next? Where do we turn our minds to moving forward from here?
Sure.
So, so I think, putting this into practice, it's really around asking questions and poll stuff. It's interesting. My wife's, she's another government employee, and she's been surveyed a couple of times about the issues that she's concerned about and also needs support in when she returns to work. So I think asking questions and polling staff and getting them, as part of that explore phase that we talked about is really important now. And being responsive to feedback and be agile in what you're doing. Setting up learning ambassadors, embedding learning in the flow of work. This is going to be one of the things that we're going to have to be looking at moving forward. consider people's learning preferences and make sure that training is responsive, short, and simple. And what I want to do on the next slide is to share with you just some of our thoughts and our thinking that we've had around how we might be curating content and training resources that's going to move people and help people with that return to work. So a little bit like what we did earlier, we did some work when we initially made the change to work remotely and identified the training resources that, that we need to be able to support people in that. And we've done some work now around what we think the types of training resources that are going to really help when we get to this return to work time. And I think, in terms of what we're looking at, the challenges that people managers have bringing people back and working from an individual remote basis to working together in the office is going to be really important. So we're thinking, what are the types of training that we can deliver that will help managers impart a positive culture or motivate teams? You know, that whole change management piece that's going to help them build workforce capability and talent management, because it's going to be building from quite a different perspective that people have had before. I think we're also looking at leading the, what the future of work looks like, and how we're going to be working with leaders on sort of areas, things like how they optimize structures, how they work on career development for employees, how they optimize the organisational capability around them. And I think for staff, it's things like adopting a positive mindset, things like how you stay healthy, make better choices, achieve a more productive and sort of balanced work life balance. And I think things like mental and emotional well-being, as people are going through this further step of change, what we can do around resilience and mental health, I think will become, really important. How people manage stress and de-stress. And I think we're going to have another time where people go from working remotely and start to go back to the office, and we need to look at things like it's people's behaviour, it's what's appropriate behaviour, how we protect people's safety, how we ensure respect amongst colleagues at work. And the other area that we've been looking at is for people who've managed their own personal change through this, and jobs have changed and roles have changed and structures have changed, but it's how we can support people building their careers and their brand. And the final thing in terms of training that we're seeing opportunities for are just retaining the sort of the hygiene basics that we've had before, making sure that people do keep all of the appropriate hygiene that they've been doing during social isolation, and how they bring that stuff back to work. So this is sort of the view at the moment that we've got around the areas that we'll be focusing on to provide training resources to people at the time that they start to come back.
Thank you, Phil. That was really informative. Just a little bit of something here on this is our Remote Readiness and Productivity Academy. Phil, did you want to talk to this?
Yeah. So look, one of the things, and we had the opportunity, this is a freebie for everybody, a no strings attached freebie, which I'd encourage all of you to take advantage of. We have put together and curated about 36 courses that go back to some of the thinking that I shared with you earlier on about what are the necessary training programs that we can offer people when they are working remotely. So we've curated a group of courses, and we've put it into what we call the Remote Readiness and Productivity Academy, which is a free LMS available for anybody who wants to get access to it. Like I say, there's no strings attached with it. There's no salespeople that are going to be ringing you afterwards. It's essentially just a bunch of curated courses that align with what our thinking was at the beginning around what are the types of training areas that people need when they're working remotely. So it covers off things like leading during a pandemic threat, safety first for the remote worker, security first. There's a lot of material in there on managing remote worker security practices, setting up a remote office, things like ergonomics, setting up your desk at home, managing a remote team during a pandemic, and health and safety essentials for everybody, including things like hygiene and things like that. So here's a freebie for you. Really encourage you to get onto it. It'll give you a bunch of courses that will help right now in terms of managing the workforce that you've got that are working remotely. And I think Claire will share a link to this with everybody after we've wrapped this up as well. So it's just a great thing. We've had terrific. We've had about 30,000 registrations for this particular portal from people who've been able to access it, and about 100,000 course completions that we've had. So it's been really, really well taken up. So I just commend that to everybody in terms of just a freebie that you can get that will help you with the current state, the here and now in terms of working remotely.
That's right. Thank you, Phil. And as Phil mentioned, at the end of the webinar, all the attendees will receive a link to the Academy and a link to a recording of the webinar as well. So key points.
Yeah, just a few points to wrap up before we go to questions. And I suppose, you know, we are going through a period of unprecedented change. To land where we are now after 9 weeks, to be going through such a significant period of change in workplaces, in a lot of cases working from home. I think HR and training have had a really critical role to support organisations through all of this. But while we're in the middle of it, we also need to be dealing with both the here and now and also what the future looks like. So the challenge for all of us is sort of managing the current change that we're going through and also thinking about what the future might look like and starting to plan for that. And more than ever, our training strategy is really, really critical. Training is so critical in all of these times of change, but we need to be thinking strategically and tactically and thinking about some of the best practice things I've been talking about, but also some of the more nimble, agile ways of delivering programs. And I think the final takeaway is you take up the free offer. That's not too often you're going to get SAP offering you 35 free courses with no strings attached as well.
And I believe we're also looking at updating it in the future with some return to work appropriate training as well. Is that right, Phil?
Yeah, we're looking at that at the moment too, whether we can make a similar offer to help organisations gear up for some training courses around what the return to work will look like.
Great. Okay, thank you, Phil. So I think we'll move into question time now. Okay. Let's have a look.
Can you see them there?
I can only just see them, but they're coming through. Let's have a look. Okay. I've had a lot of comments. I'm just working my way through. Comments are interesting, but I'm looking for questions. Okay, let's have a look here. Okay, so here's a question from someone. How should we reconsider the learning environment being at home rather than in the office in terms of modelling the learning journey? So I think, Phil, this person's asking about learning journeys and how we can mimic that journey at home as opposed to in the office.
It's
a good question.
It's a tough question actually, because it's one of those things where we've been looking at even things like onboarding and induction and trying to mirror what some of those processes look like when people are doing that remotely versus what they're doing at home. And I think to the extent that we can use, we can understand what the journey looks like. So that whole journey mapping thing that we've got to go through when people are trying to acquire skills is the starting point. but then trying to look at what technology enablement we have to be able to replicate what might happen in the workplace. So I think we can remap. We can look at learning journeys, and we can look at compiling assets and resources around what that journey looks like. And some of it will be self-paced, some of it will be instructor-led, remote type interventions that people have got. So I think we can still do it, but I think we just need to start with that, looking at what the mapping and that journey exercise is in the first instance.
Thanks for that, Phil. Someone's asked a really simple question, which is how many people answered the poll. The answer is that around about 64% of the attendees answered, and we've had around 250 attendees at the webinar today. So that's a decent sample, I think, for a webinar. Yeah. Someone's also asked, what are learning ambassadors?
So I suppose it's a term that we've used internally, but it's people who are prepared to champion a particular subject area or topic, and you know, people who may decide that they have a particular area of expertise or skill that they're prepared to share and become a local expert on and a champion on. So I can just think of, we've got one guy, John, who's this become the mindfulness ambassador, and so he's developing up skills and he's developed sort of just different responses around mindfulness training. So John arrives at every meeting with a mindfulness training session for us. We've had Ryan, who's been really good working with us around just the use of Zoom, and so he's been sort of a champion on that. We've got another person who's put their hand up, and they're running bi-weekly sessions on using other collaboration technology to work remotely. So it's just that idea of a local champion or ambassador who's prepared to take it up, and also we're empowering that person to be able to do it, giving them the tools and resources to support them.
Phil, we've also had a couple of questions about the Remote Readiness and Productivity Academy from existing clients. It's a good question. A couple of attendees have asked, can we link the Remote Readiness, add the Remote Readiness and Productivity Academy to our current LMS that we have with Litmos, SAP Litmos?
The best thing to do would be to get the learning paths that we've created from your account manager and assemble the learning paths within, because it's pre-existing content. So what you'd be best able to do would be get the learning path, create the learning paths with the content, with the recommended content that we've got, and create those paths within your platform, and then you can just basically push that content out to everybody, and you'll get full reporting within your existing platform. So it's simple to do, and just all you need from your account manager is just the learning paths and the content that we've got, and you'll be able to get up and running straight away.
Great. Another question here. This is a good one too. Do you think there will be investment in training given all the tighter budgets post-COVID?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's probably two schools of thought about this, and I can speak from personal experience. One of the schools of thought is, in times of change and when there is reduction in budgets and organisations are struggling struggling financially, training's the first thing that gets cut. And the second school of thought is that now more than ever is a better time to invest in training and the upskilling of staff. I can tell you from the perspective of, I can share this with you from the perspective of our business. We are receiving more inquiries post all of this change than before for organisations that are looking to take on a platform to deliver training. And I can also share with you my last experience during the last global financial crisis when I owned an e-learning business in those days, and that was probably the period of biggest growth that I had. So there will be some organisations that will use this as a way of saying, let's just cut back the training budget because we need to go into cost saving mode. There'll be other organisations that will see this as an opportunity to invest and grow. And I think the experience from past change has been those that have invested have really been able to maintain a stronger position in the future. So it's not a time to go into training hibernation. I think now's the time to go into really promoting training. And I think I've made the point earlier that investing in training is not just about upskilling, it's also about building engagement with people and trying to show that you're actually prepared to invest in them during a time of difficulty. So I can't give a definitive answer either way, but I can certainly tell you from the perspective of our business, we are not seeing a downturn in interest in training.
Thank you, Phil. I think we've got time for one more question. We have someone here who's asked about familiarity with technology. Says a large percentage of our workforce are not tech savvy. How can I ensure they get the most from the online learning experience? Phil?
Yeah, so I mean, I can just share with you what we're doing at SAP. So we have one a learning ambassador, and he runs sessions. I said bi-weekly before. It's actually twice a week he's doing them. So 1 o'clock on was today. I think it's actually it was overlapping with this. So it must be Mondays and Wednesdays, or Wednesdays and Fridays. And they're just open sessions on how to use any sort of learning technology. So we've got one guy that's put his hand up in the Melbourne office to run these sessions, and they're still getting really, really strong numbers. There's no particular agenda in mind, and it's just questions and answer sessions. So, and they range from everything from Zoom to we've got questions around some of the learning platforms that we have. And people are they're open sessions that people can do. And I think they've been really, really effective. And it's a way that, so long as people can navigate how to get onto some of the virtual communication tools and you use that, they've been really effective. And I'd really recommend those types of sessions to organisations. Just an open door session, just a couple of times a week or once a week, and just have a basic philosophy that says no question's a stupid question, and encourage people to get on and use that and help them navigate those tools.
Terrific. Thank you, Phil. I think it's 2 o'clock, so that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, taking time out of your lunchtime or post-lunch slump. I know it's not always easy, but thank you for joining us. We've certainly enjoyed presenting to you. As I mentioned earlier, we will send out a recording of the webinar, and we'll send out a link to the Remote Readiness and Productivity Academy as well. So thank you, and have a good rest of your week. Stay well. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.